Hi, Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is Matthew Tilghman, who arguably was the leader of revolutionary Maryland. And when I say that, I don't mean the most famous leader from Maryland, I mean the most important leader working within the confines of the state of Maryland. That doesn't mean he doesn't make his way to the national stage. That's a double negative, but let's talk about him. So by the time the Revolutionary War breaks out, Matthew Tilghman is already in his mid-50s, and he is a leader of Maryland. He's been in the Colonial Assembly for 2 decades, and he served for quite some time as Speaker of Maryland's Colonial Assembly. Now, once everything starts getting a little feisty up in Massachusetts and the call goes out for a Continental Congress, many royal governors of different colonies dissolved their colonial assemblies in an effort to prevent the colonists from meeting. And Maryland was no different. However, like many of the colonies, when the royal governor dissolves Maryland's government, these people decide to meet anyway. They are supposed to represent the people, aren't they? So they do. They meet in Annapolis, and they have what they call the Annapolis Convention. Now, let's not confuse this with the Annapolis Convention of 1786, which would lead essentially to the Constitutional Convention the following year. This Annapolis Convention was more like a Congress of the colonial assemblymen. It met for several years as hostilities emerged, and right now we're talking about 1774. Again, once Massachusetts is locked off from the rest of the world and everything starts going haywire. So this assembly meets for just 4 days. Now, the first thing they do is choose a president, and that chairman, I should say, is Matthew Tilghman. And he oversees the debate. And in just 4 days, they do an extraordinary amount of work. Not only do they decide how they're going to operate, but they organize their procedures. They send supplies to Boston. As I said, Boston had, in the Massachusetts Government Act, had been cut off from its port and therefore needed literally everything from within the colonies, either Massachusetts proper or other colonies. And many other colonies did help and send food and supplies. And that was the first thing they did. Additionally, they decide to set up a committee of correspondence to continue communicating with other colonies. They also send delegates to the first Continental Congress. And of the delegates chosen, the person chosen to lead the delegation representing Maryland to the first Continental Congress was none other than Matthew Tilghman. See, I told you he'd show up on the national stage. So Tilghman goes with them. Oh, before he leaves, the last thing they do is they pre-approve to agree with any boycott that the Continental Congress might issue, which is an interesting foreshadow to what the first Continental Congress does, is they create the boycott, the Continental Association, which boycotts any British goods from being imported to the United States. So it first of all, it demonstrates that this idea was out there, but also demonstrates Maryland, being led by Tilghman, its forward-thinking attitude towards what might have to go down in order to correct the issues with Great Britain. Now, Tilghman would actually be sent back to the Second Continental Congress and be there long enough to sit in for the vote on independence. And Matthew Tilghman would vote for independence. Unfortunately, like a pretty big handful of people who voted for independence, Tilghman would leave the Congress almost immediately to go back and work within his home state. And unfortunately, because of this, he's not around a month later when they actually sign the document, but he does become an extraordinarily important person. I should also note that the Tilghman family itself was deeply divided in whether or not to support the rebels. His brother became a loyalist and did not associate with him. And his brother's son, aka Matthew's nephew, Tench Tilghman, joins the revolutionary fight, despite, again, his father not joining. And Tench would be famous for being a part of George Washington's family as an aide-de-camp and being the person who rides from Yorktown to Philadelphia to tell the Continental Congress of the American victory. As for Matthew, he spends the rest of his career, as I said, working within the state, building Maryland into the successful state it came. So that's a little bit about Matthew Tilghman. I hope you learned something. If you did, definitely hit like. And if you're new here, hit subscribe for a different founder 7 days a week. And I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.